Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of Question Time with myself, Harry Knight. Once again, I'm going to be doing my best to provide some answers for some of the questions that you've left for me in the comment streams under our previous videos. Now, before I get into this episode too much, I just wanted to give you guys a quick apology for my absence over the last couple of weeks. The backstory is we have been reopening Surf Simply. Costa Rica has reopened its borders and we have people coming down to stay with us. So that process took away a little bit of my time for doing this, getting everything rolling, getting back into the routine of work. But I have snuck in here after work one evening, and hopefully I can continue to do this as we go forwards and continue to make these videos now that the resort is up and running. Anyway, first question this episode comes from Lancen Fuller. And Lancen's question was, is there a quick way to calculate the volume of a surfboard? And I'm afraid that the quick answer is no, there isn't. There really isn't. Surfboards are such complex shapes. We have, the calculating the volume of a simple shape like a cube is fairly simple. We take the width and the height and the depth of that shape, and we multiply all of those dimensions together, and we get the volume of the shape. But unfortunately, surfboards almost never have any straight lines on them, and in fact very few surfboards even have continuous radius curves. They're compound curves that don't have a fixed radius, and that makes it almost impossible to have any kind of mathematical calculation for the volume of the board. There's no quick way of doing it. The quickest, laziest way to do it is to just compare your board to other boards that you can find, online. So, whether you've got a short board or a fish or a mid-length, whatever the board is, find a few other boards on websites that look pretty similar and compare their volumes. And you should be able to kind of figure out the volume of your board to within 4 or 5 liters, maybe. It's not totally accurate, but it'll probably only take you a little while on the internet to kind of come up with that number. If we want to be more accurate, we're going to have to get a good bit more technical. And there's the old school way of doing it, and there's the new school way of doing it. The old school way is to dunk the board into a tank of water and measure the amount of water that flows out over the side. The new school way is to use the shaping software on a computer to build a 3D model of the board. And the computer can calculate the volume of a complex shape like that very, very easily. They've both got their positives and negatives. If we're using the water tank method, first of all, you're going to have to get hold of a tank that can hold, that you can push the whole surfboard into, which not many of us have lying around. You then got to fill it all the way up to the brim with water, and then when you dunk the board in, you've got to dunk it in very carefully so that we don't spill any water. We're not creating any waves and ripples that spill more water over than the displacement of the board. And then when you fill the tank back up again afterwards, you've got to measure very, very carefully how much water we're adding back into the tank. But that final amount of water, that is the volume of the surfboard to quite a high degree of accuracy if we do all of that correctly. Now, doing it the new school way, you're going to need shaping software, but actually you can download that for free. Shape 3D and Aku Shaper or AKU Shaper, I'm never sure what the correct pronunciation there is. They're both free. I'll put links down below. It's quite fun playing around with the software. It takes a little while to work it out, but it's not particularly hard to create a 3D model of a surfboard using that software. So all we need then is some accurate measurements. We're going to need the length, the width, and the thickness of the board at 4 or 5 places along the length of the surfboard. And we're also going to need to do the rail thickness again on a couple of places along the rails so that we can get all of those measurements kind of in, and then the surfboard, the shaping software should spit out again a pretty accurate volume for the board, assuming that we were able to measure the board good and accurately. The big thing you'll need there is a set of calipers that are big enough to kind of reach around and get an accurate measurement of the thickness of the board in the middle of it. But yeah, that's kind of the 2 ways you can go about doing it. I mean, I guess there is the final way is just get in contact with whoever shaped the board in the first place, even if they haven't written the volume on the board. If it was shaped in the last 20 years or so, there's a really good chance that it was designed on a computer and shaped, or at least the initial shaping was done on a machine. And that shaper may well still have the file for that board and be able to tell you what the volume is. So, you know, it can't hurt to give them an email and get in touch. But yeah, sorry, there isn't an easier way to do it than that. All right, next question then comes from Catabolic Beast. It's an interesting username, but Catabolic Beast was watching one of our previous episodes. We were talking about how to deal with a steep taking off on waves that stand up very quickly and you end up taking kind of steep drops. And my answer to how to deal with those waves was to, you know, paddle early, paddle fast, and try to get into the wave as early as possible. And he or she got in touch saying that you know, they found that an interesting observation, but that they see a lot of people sitting very deep and waiting until the wave's right on top of them, you know, just doing 1 or 2 paddles and just sort of free falling into the wave. So as with many things with surfing, there is not one correct way to do it. Both methods will work, but they require very different levels of skill. In order to do this sort of late takeoff, you know, wait for the wave to get to you, 1, 2, maybe even no paddle strokes at all, just sort of rolling into the wave, getting to our feet and surfing off. It's super, super stylish. It's sort of the pinnacle of the laid back style surfing in critical conditions. But the problem is that in order to do this, we need a few things. First of all, you need to have really, really good ability to predict where and when a wave is going to break. You need to be able to see a wave coming in and predict to within 1 or 2 meters where that wave is going to break. And if we're more than 1 or 2 meters out, you're not going to be able to really use this technique to catch the waves. We're either going to end up too deep and the whole wave pitching over on top of us, or we're going to be too far out to sea and we won't be able to catch the wave. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we have to accept that using this, every single takeoff we do is going to be steep and late. And so our pop-up needs to be textbook. We need to be able to just get that board in underneath our feet, you know, almost free falling down the face of the wave, our feet landing in perfect position every single time. The final thing that we need to then do is actually pick the right waves, because if the wave, when you take off like this, we don't actually have very much forward speed. And so if the wave peels quickly down the line, you're actually just going to get left stuck in the whitewater, or you know, pulling into a barrel and the whole thing shutting down on you. So when it works, this method looks really, really good. What you tend not to see in the surf movies when you see people doing this is all the failed attempts where they get the positioning wrong, or they take off and the wave peels faster than they thought and they get left behind. The advantage of the technique that I was talking about in the previous episode is that we need a much lower base level of skill. Okay, we sit a little bit further out, we paddle as hard and fast as we can, and as we look over our shoulder as we're paddling, we can moderate our speed, or modulate our speed, I guess is the correct term, to make sure that we're catching the wave at the right point where it's not too steep and it's not too soft. We're hopefully going to be catching the wave earlier where it's not as steep. We're going to be getting to our feet. Remember that scale we were talking about, that A, B, C, D, E, F scale that we were talking about? We're going to be trying to catch the wave so that we're standing up when the wave's a nice, easy C. We're making a relatively easy drop. We've got time to set our rail and much more chance of making it down the line on a faster wave. So what I would recommend is get that technique down first. If you find steep, fast breaking waves difficult, start with my first method. You know, sit a little bit further out, paddle hard and fast, try and catch the waves as early as possible. And then once you can do that reliably, we can then start moving ourselves, you know, sitting closer and closer in, timing our paddle later and later and later, going for steeper and steeper drops. But we want to have that core skill down first of all, before we start modulating that. So yeah, hopefully that sort of explains why that is. Because you're right, you know, very often when we look at waves that are steep, that are fast. The people that we see successfully riding those waves are very often the better, more experienced surfers, who will quite often be using this technique of, you know, these lazy, you know, 1 or 2 paddles to get them into the wave and dropping in, and it hidden within that casualness is the hours and hours and hours and hours that they've spent in the water, watching waves, watching them come in, trying to predict, trying to be in the right place at the right time, and getting it wrong. You know, all we see is that beautiful, stylish success at the end of it. So yeah, hopefully that clears that one up and answers that question for anybody that was thinking the same thing. Cool. Last question this episode comes from Giuliano Perseu. Again, I hope I got that pronunciation correct. Giuliano was asking about whether when you get a set of fins that's a thruster set, and you can get a set of fins that is a 5-fin, you know, thruster quad set, are there any differences between those fin sets? And broadly speaking, no, there probably won't be. You know, if it's the same fins, then there probably won't be any difference really. There are some fins that are specifically designed as thrusters, and some fins that are specifically designed as quads, and you won't ever find those fin sets being sold as part of a 5-fin set. But where the fin is a bit more of a general purpose fin, you'll quite often see them. You know, FCS really like doing this. Futures do it as well, and they'll sell you know, the 3 big fins of the thruster and then the 2 smaller back fins of the quad, and they'll sell that as a set of 5 fins. Now, the thing that's actually more relevant is where the fins would be installed on the board. And this is the big thing, is that generally when you have 5 fin boxes in the bottom of a surfboard, there's a slight compromise to the design. If you talk to a lot of shapers, and I will say here that you know, for a lot of shapers, the fin positioning, the exact positioning of the fins, is kind of like one of their little secret sauce things that they add into the board. But that positioning of the fins, generally, if you're setting a board up as a thruster or as a quad, the position, particularly the bigger front fins, is going to be very slightly different for a thruster or a quad. And so if the board is primarily a thruster or primarily as a quad, that's what they'll do, and then they'll add the back fins in as a little bit of a compromise. So a good example of this, you know, very famous board model, the Hypto Crypto by Hayden Shapes. Hayden Cox, that board was originally designed as a thruster, and for a long time Hayden Cox didn't release it as a quad or as a 5-fin, despite there being a lot of demand from the public for a 5-fin or a quad version, precisely because, you know, he felt that there were other changes that he'd want to make. But eventually he did release a 5-fin version, and I'm sure if you spoke to, you know, a really, really high-level pro that was very, very sensitive to these things, or Hayden Cox himself, you know, he would probably tell you that board is still really designed around a thruster setup, and the 2 quad fin boxes are put in the best possible position given the compromise there. And there are other boards, you know, that will be designed as a quad, and the front fin positions, if you're using the board as a thruster, those front fins will not be in the perfect position if you were designing it as a thruster. But for mere mortals like us, you know, we're almost certainly not going to notice those tiny, you know, percent differences in performance. So yeah, hopefully that answered that question. Quick episode this time round, a little short episode, but I've got a few more technical questions that people have asked that I've sort of been rolling through, and maybe get to some of those in future episodes. So hopefully that was interesting. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that. If you have any more questions or comments for me, please throw them down below, and hopefully I will see you this time next week. And until then, stay safe and take care. Bye-bye.